Hi, everybody. So, due to popular demand, we're back with our next series of our Keep It Simple. This is our fifth series, Keep It Simple series, all about property. So basically, I've had a lot of questions in the last while really related to the new legislation from landlords and tenants alike. This hot off the press, as you know. So literally on Tuesday, the 10th of June, Minister Brown introduced changes to the RPZ, the rent pressure zone legislation that was introduced in 2016. So there are a number of key changes. The first one is that the RPZ, the rent pressure zone, now applies to the entire country. Secondly, for existing tenancies, the current 2% rate still applies, but for new tenancies, after March 2026, a landlord can now go in at full market rent. For newly built apartments only for the moment, the 2% cap no longer applies, and the increases will be in line with inflation. So, and also now I suppose this is the point that a lot of people have been asking me. So basically, under the new legislation, tenancies will become what's called tenancies of unlimited duration with a minimum duration of 6 years. So what does that mean? So I suppose this 6-year rule will allow landlords to rent a property at market value at the end of that 6-year tenancy, regardless of whether the actual tenant is in place or not, or in between tenancies only where the tenant leaves voluntarily or he or she is in breach of their obligations. So just to note here that if a landlord exercises the right to break a tenancy, for example, moving a family member back in, then they cannot reset the rent. It'll still remain at the current value, just to note that. And also an important point to note here that there's a restriction under the new legislation on the smaller landlords and the bigger landlords. But in the case of a smaller landlord, if he or she wants to move a family member back in, they'll only be allowed to do so if that immediate family member needs the property urgently, or if the landlord is, if you like, is in has undergoing some form of hardship. For example, he or she is bankrupt or insolvent. Now, an important point here for my landlords to note that during this 6-year period, you can still move a tenant out of a property under the current legislation, the clauses that exist. In other words, the tenant is in breach, for example, rent arrears. The landlord wants to needs the property for himself or wants to move in a family member, substantially refurbish the property, the sale of the property, obviously, or change the use of the property. They still apply. And then finally, eliminating the no-fault termination. This is now abolished altogether. So where a tenant has complied with the legislation and is not in any breach, a landlord now cannot no longer end that tenancy after 6 months. So if you have any questions at all, please just email me or DM me. Thanks for listening.